I am Hannah Huante. I am a content creator, podcaster, and founder of a consulting agency on apologetic strategies.
Amazing. And so tell us a little bit more about how you got your start, because I know that you've recently started a business as a consultant and that came out of your growth on Instagram. And I love that transition for you. So why don't you
Oh,
tell us a little bit
thanks.
more about that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. My story is so long. I'm like, do you want the short or long version? It's so funny. So I moved to San Diego to go to college. I went to University of San Diego
Mhm.
and I was studying to actually go to law school.
Mm,
And I've always loved fashion, but like it was never I never thought I would be doing this. I definitely have always had like the entrepreneurial itch. Like
yeah,
my dad runs a company and my mom does, but like I did not think that was like the path I was going to go on. But my mental health is like a huge part of my story because I felt like, and this was back when I started 7 years ago. This was like TikTok wasn't a thing. People like were not talking about anything really real online at this point. Like it was like the Alexa Rienne like model like era of Instagram.
right.
So like it wasn't like a huge like influencer space yet. And so I felt like just very alone in my mental health. I was super depressed, very anxious, and like I just felt like everyone wasn't like being real about
Yeah,
just life in general. Like I just felt like life is hard, and I
yeah,
talk a lot about it on the podcast, but like no one was being like, today fucking sucks. Sorry, am I allowed
right.
to cuss on this podcast?
Oh my God. Well,
Yeah,
we've never
like
before,
no
but
one was like showing up being like, today fucking sucks.
right.
And like this is what's going on. And so I love fashion and I felt like I wasn't like the stereotypical model looking girl and I wanted to see like more women just like wearing outfits and like inspiring others to feel confident, but I also wanted to like see more realness online. And so I was like, I'm just going to start like posting my outfits and like talking about my day to day. And like simultaneously, I was like really going through, facing myself in the mirror and like
Yeah,
really needing to do the work. And so I started going to therapy like simultaneously as like kind of all this was starting and just started sharing online like what I was feeling. Like if I woke up depressed, I wasn't scared to be like, I feel so depressed today. And it just kind of like grew from there. And I graduated USD honestly like not in the best mental space still at this point, and like I was like I can't go to law school. I'm like just not equipped for it right now. The like blog and Instagram, because I have like it's kind of started with a blog and
hmm,
Instagram,
hmm,
is like taking off. I should just like spend the year really focused on therapy and like seeing if I can actually turn this into a career. And flash forward, I was able to do that. And so I just kept growing my community online and working with
yeah,
brands. And I was, really, really deep in therapy, especially during the pandemic.
I
So being
bet.
able to like share that experience and kind of grow a community based in not just fashion and confidence, but also like mental health was super important to me.
Yeah.
And then
I
I
feel
was
like they
like,
all kind of go together too, right? Like
totally,
the better
totally.
you feel when you wake up in the morning, the more apt you are to try to like throw it together, try something new. And then once you do that and you get this like kind of fresh feedback or like, the energy changes in the room as you're walking outside with this like funky new fit, you kind of you're feeling yourself and there's something that shifts inside yourself. And it's a
Totally.
double-edged sword. It's a hard one because when you're not feeling like you want to come get out of bed or try or do anything like that, it's hard to pull yourself out. And I was reading about your work before we started this, obviously, and I've been following you and think what you're doing is so incredible. And a big part of Wild and Wise is for this second season, I really wanted to meet new people because a lot of the people that I was interviewing were people that I knew really well, that I was like
Yeah.
so, fascinated with how they did business. But what I think is really incredible is, first of all, you named your company Unapologetic Strategies, which I absolutely love. I myself am feel like known for being unapologetic, and the refinement of what it means to be unapologetic has changed a lot from my 20s and sort of this rebellion against the status quo and kind of being queer and, getting tattoos and, having a baby with by myself, you know, as a single
Wow.
mom. And so I feel like that's what I was really attracted to with your brand, was just the rejection of the status quo, the embracing of the authenticity, but also like how much like empathy and soul I can see in like the work you're doing when you talk about the work you're doing and who you're trying to help. And I
Thank
feel like
you.
that emotionally based business is something that like 10 years ago I don't know would have taken off at all. I mean, even my mom, like if I ever post something about having a hard day, um still has that like old school business feeling of like, oof, your clients are going to see this, you know. And I get that, you know, different generation, but I love watching younger women than me, like yourself, who are unapologetic and who have found their voice, but also that you found your voice also in a way because people were giving you feedback that they were listening to and that they felt that way too and that they needed to see this too. And so what a great outlet for you to be able to grow at a perfect time, right?
Thank you. That's so nice and powerful of you to say because I think there's a few things. So like first, like totally relate to like the evolution of unapologetic.
Mm,
Because I think like before I started going to therapy and really working through like my childhood trauma and like the all these triggers I had and like really toxic behaviors I was bringing into my relationships in life. Like unapologetic looked so much
yes,
harsher. It
harsher.
was totally not healed and unrefined.
That's
But
me,
I think
baby.
like at a deeper level, like I knew that like I didn't feel safe in my authentic self. I didn't feel seen.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like my feelings were validated. So I think at my core, like even naming the blog how Han sees it, like just it's just how I see it. Like
Right.
subconsciously, I think I always was just looking to be aligned and be able
Yeah.
to speak in that way. And so I think over time, unapologetic has now moved into this like more mature space of like
Yes.
unapologetically just being real because
Yeah.
to your point like that people are craving human connection and I think
Yeah.
that's why like the podcast evolved like I was like I can't do these like really deep captions on like an editorial shoot like I could but I don't
Right.
want to
Right. Right.
so
Right. Right.
like I was like oh I'm going to start a podcast and that started like a year and a half ago and same thing just like bringing people on to share people's like unapologetic stories of like what they're
Yeah.
going through what they've been through and where they are now and I think people are starting to realize or at least the smarter people in business are starting to realize that that emotional connection is necessary even in a professional space and there's obviously a way to do it but I think that we are in a time where people are realizing how much they crave that human connection piece and that's how I started the consulting agency. I had so many people coming up to me in my like actual like real life being
Right.
like how have you done this like how have you done this because people are
Mhm.
starting to realize like social media is important
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
welcome
Yeah. Yeah.
and so they're like how do I do this how do I do this and I just realized like people aren't understanding that posting on socials is not enough you
Well,
have to
showing
bring an
up is how you
element.
show up. Right.
Yeah. You have to bring an element of authenticity in your mission and your story. And the job of an influencer is to do so.
Right.
And I realized that like what set me apart from other people who had these consulting agencies and social media, you know, marketing businesses is that none of them were influencers. And
Mhm.
like I was, and I knew how to do this, and I know how to translate story into articulation on Instagram. And so that's kind of
Yeah.
how the consulting agency was born. It was just this need where I realized, like, oh my God, like there's this huge space for it. And there's a lot of clients that are already asking for my help. I just need to do it. And so that's kind of
Right.
how it started. And of course, I named it Unapologetic Strategies because
I mean,
we
it's
all need to be unapologetic.
right. It's so true. And I felt very connected with like how like a lot of the stuff you do is what Chrome City does,
Yeah,
where somebody thinks they have like no story or they think like whatever it is, it's like a restaurant that's not opening for a year, so we don't need to hire you yet. And I'm like, no, no, no. We need to get into the story and the roots and the meaning and the person and the people. And like, I always say to the girls every day, like, I can't believe we get to do this every day because I think since I was a young girl, I felt like I was always watching people, understanding the environments around me, and assessing this what was happening. And I had deep empathy, which meant like I was a crier a lot, or like overwhelmed, or all the things that sort of happen when you then kind of have mental health challenges
totally.
later on. And a lot of that awareness and watching and soaking in was due to coming being in like a chaotic home as a child and my dad also had like a lot of drinking issues. And so I feel like it's so interesting in life how the chaotic moments that sort of feel like childhood trauma or that are childhood trauma also shape us to be so empathetic and aware that we end up, once we work on it, become aligned and get the right help that we need for our mental health. Um, we're
100%.
able to pour that into the business world where I know that I have a keen eye for something in a way. And again, I'm almost 40 and I've been doing this, had my agency for 10 years. I know nobody else can see what I see. I know that I am different than anyone else. And I can probably attribute that to some of the harder things in my life, that I had to be on high alert or that I had to be reading the room at all moments to understand what was going on. And I think that's probably that way for a lot of people. If you find a lot of people who are really successful, my guess is they're either throwing themselves into work because they were avoiding something else, which is something I've done in my life, like not dealing with my own issues. So I'll just work until midnight.
Yeah.
Like that was my favorite unapologetic thing to do. We have found this wildness within us, this wild creativity that's unapologetic, but the wisdom is what kind of holds it all together, that doesn't make it this like loud, like you were talking about, kind of like cutting people off, or, when you first find your voice and you're like having boundaries for the first time and it's really
Mhm.
harsh. And that refinement as you grow is really that sweet spot that I feel like we're both in different worlds, but feels really good that we can pour it into our work.
100%. And I think I love that you like bring like the word wise into your self brand, because I always tell people, like, especially like am, I always believe that the healing journey is continuous, but like I've
Yes.
definitely made like a 360 in my life for sure. Like from
Yeah.
a point of like so not self aware to like now so much wiser. And I always
Yeah.
say to myself and others, like, whenever I'm in like a space of feeling a bit like victimy and a bit like, why can't I just be normal? Why did I have to go through this stuff? I always like think about like how much wisdom and understanding I have that like I would never have if I didn't go through the things I went through. And so I do agree with you. I think there's like a level of like I'm always the person that people trauma dump on, like even random people. I think
Me
there's
too.
like an energy you carry, and
Yeah.
like people feel safe when you like
Yeah.
have been through the stuff that we have, or like you have that like wisdom, like that
Mhm.
healing that you've done. And so I do love that word. I think it's like it rings very true for me as well. And
Mhm.
I laughed when you said that like you're so emotional too, because I cry at like the randomest of stuff. Like I can't
Yeah.
watch like any talent auditions online, like, or like TV. I will like cry like a baby. But it's
Mhm.
funny because there was a point in my life where like I wasn't actually able to cry like at
Yeah.
all. I would
Yeah.
just like cry at like random things.
Yeah.
Out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I could be watching The Bachelorette and be like finding a cute moment where like I feel like this boy is like a sweet boy who might be her husband, and I'm immediately like
Yeah.
the one.
I told
Um,
my friend the other day, I was like, I just watched the NFL draft like on TikTok and I'm like crying
yeah,
because
yeah,
this
yeah.
kid like
You
got
can
his
feel it.
dream.
I know, that's how
Yeah.
I am. It doesn't matter what it is. If I can feel that somebody is being vulnerable and then there's a win, or even just being vulnerable, like, it could just
Mhm.
be like a kid telling their mom that they love them. The vulnerability, it's like I'm so raw because I've had to pull so many layers back of what I've built on top of my heart to protect it, that I'm now peeling the layers back, but I've peeled so many, like you said, I feel so, like, aligned, I feel so self-aware that I'm just raw. So I'm just
Yeah.
like, at the drop of a hat, I'm gonna cry because there's nothing really protecting my heart anymore, which is
Yeah.
beautiful that I've found a place in life, a relationship. My fiance and I are in year 6, and I think we both right now, 6 years in, feel 100% comfortable, confident, kind, loving, accepting, like, and I'm not comparing to other people, but like our best friends, they've had that pretty much since the get, and they've had their own challenges, but I think it took a long time because we both grew up with trauma, because we both had really protected ourselves to really be 100%. Like, I don't think we knew what 100% us was. I think it took us coming together to patiently and over time invest in one another, make decisions to change, go to therapy together, see each other in hard moments, go through the pandemic together, have children together. And really, I think right now there's just like a this depth of love that I didn't know was possible that feels so safe. And that I think that's where I feel like I'm 100% authentically me, because he would always say when I first met him, like, I had a shaved head. I just moved back from Chicago and I was just a heavy smoker and always wearing a leather jacket, like so rough. And here I am wearing pink bows right now,
Oh
like
my
the big
god.
change, the big change. And I remember him being like, "You don't have to do what you do out there here." And I'd be like, "What do you mean?" And I was always like such a bitchy bitch. And he's like, "You can like drop that guard when you come here." And I was like, I wouldn't even know how to unbutton the first button. Like that makes me want to cry. But like I didn't even
Yeah.
know where to start to unbutton the cape that I had been wearing for so long, because I had been sewing that thing on forever. It's like,
Yeah.
where do you find the first stitch to let it even unveil or to start to open up? And so I think that is the hardest thing for like women entrepreneurs and strong women and women that have worked really hard on themselves, is like maybe we're in an aligned place, but when it comes to then having a partner, it really fucks your brains up. Like I just was like, I don't know, like I figured this all out that works, and little did I
Dating
know
is hard. It's
it
so
is.
hard. Your story
It
makes me
is.
want to cry. That's so beautiful. I love that.
But
I think
I
that's
had to
like,
wait. I mean,
yeah,
I
no, it's
at 42.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I think it's hard because for business and dating. So business, I think like when you're so emotional, you get attached to everything and everyone, and especially for me, like with the blog and Instagram and like TikTok and the podcast, like this is my full-time job. So like it's very personal. Like
Yeah.
this is like all me. So
Yeah.
when things don't go right, or a campaign doesn't go through, or something isn't liked by someone, like it's very hard not to take that loss personally, because it's
Yeah.
like me. So I think like though the emotional vulnerability is like, I would say mostly a strength, and
Uh-huh.
like has like allowed me so much growth in my business, it's also something I've had to keep in check, because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, like this is personal, but it doesn't have to be personal. Like this reaction doesn't have to
Right.
be personal. And then in
Right.
regard to dating, oh my God, like I think realizing that like I thought I was so open. Like I think like my entire career, I've been doing this for 7 years now. I'm 27, so I'm obviously still young, but I think like I always viewed myself, because I speak online about all this deep shit, that
Mhm.
like I always thought I was the super open person.
Right.
And then I think I realized, like, as I've gotten older and I'm like trying to find someone and date and whatever, like how closed off I am in like romantic relationships. Like, I've
Mhm.
always been the caretaker. I've
Right.
always been the one that everyone trauma dumps on and like shares their shit with. And then I have never like allowed or trusted a man to like do the same for me.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting, like in this place now where I get to like start actually flexing some of these growth things that I've like
Right.
addressed within myself. Like it's one thing to like look in the mirror, accept the like shit about yourself and like, wow, like this was because of this. And like, this is amazing. But I always say on the podcast, like, all of this stuff, like the work and therapy and like realizations, like it just gives you context for like
Mhm.
everything you do. It doesn't actually just like make you
No,
make
you
different
have to put
choices.
it into practice. You have to
Yes.
A lot of times you leave a therapy session and go like, "Did that move the needle? I'm not sure." And then something else happens a week later where you react just a little differently than you would have, and you were like, "That was the session. That was the reason.
Totally.
Was the
Well, and I
change."
think making the decision is just like a whole nother ball game. I think
Right.
like making the hard choice is so fucking hard when that choice doesn't feel natural.
Right.
And so like actually having to like hear the therapy sesh echo in your head and like know that the trigger is happening in that moment and be like, you have a decision here. Are you going to do the thing you normally do, or are you going to be vulnerable, or are you going to show up in this way, or are you going to communicate? And that's like a completely different ball game. So I think like I always say entrepreneurship is like another mental health journey, because it pushes you in so many ways to be vulnerable, not just in your professional relationships, but it shows a lot about you, like how
Yeah.
you react in certain situations, especially when it comes to like rejection and vulnerability, and then how you can take it back into your actual personal life.
Right. And I totally agree with you. Like I can speak in front of an audience and like woo a crowd, and I can make people in work feel warm and get a big client and see into their soul and tell their story. And then it come to dating and I was like too
Yeah.
emotional to this. But you know what's interesting is that's fully shifted where I love my clients with all of my heart, but I don't go home and like harp and think about it because I have something else happening there where my heart has now opened really to my family and to my partner. And now with work it's like I love it so much, but I'm not like deeply affected. Will things irk me? Absolutely. But
Yeah.
like I don't ever, I mean, I think the first time I ever had a panic attack was when I started my company and I had never even heard of what a panic attack was. And I was so confused. And I really think for like 5 years, I felt like I was underwater in that way. You know, I just felt overwhelmed and the responsibility of like 12 staff members and the monthly income need of like 45,000 a month and having to close deals and manage. And I was just in a state of like fight or flight the entire time. And then I met Jason, and he really allowed me this like safe space to say like you don't have you can close this thing down and start fresh. Like you'd be fine. Like
Mhm.
nobody, I mean, no thought in my mind was ever to close it down. I
Yeah.
was that's an option. But then as I started to lean into him for the softness, and I'm not saying everybody has to find a partner to like get softer and work and like leave that. But for me, that was my journey. Then I got to sort of open my soul and heart a little bit more to him and kind of create more boundary with work. And I was an emotionally driven boss. I was mean. I was super mean to my staff because I was just like on this mission, new boundary, that new kind of like open wounded person. And I feel now that like I feel very soft at work. I feel like my team and I have a nice, healthy respect and relationship for each other. But it doesn't feel so like overbearing all over me. I don't feel
No, for
consumed.
sure.
But it took a while.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're speaking to something really important. And like, yes, I guess that not everyone needs a partner, but I would argue that like we all need human connection. Like, that's
Yeah.
why influencers have jobs. And like, that's
Yeah.
why I do what I do. And so
Right.
I think for a while, I was like hiding from like intimate relationships, like
Yeah.
romantic and friendship, because I was
Yeah.
so scarred by the people who had hurt me. I just like closed myself off in that way. And to your point, I was able to like jump on a podcast and be like, yeah, I was suicidal, I was depressed, I was anxious, like I was sharing all this deep shit. And then in person with like a man or like with a friend, I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. Like, and we're
Yeah.
good, you know?
Why
It
is that? It's so
felt
funny.
it
Strange.
is funny. It's just like a way to protect yourself, I think. And for
Yeah.
me, like my business and, my mission of like be making people feel comfortable and not alone and like really sharing like that overrides a lot of my insecurity. So I think
Yeah.
like to me, like like the podcast and on the blog, like I don't think about the fact that like I'm being vulnerable with these people. I'm leading with mission, so I think it's
Yeah.
easier. But like when you're with people in your real life, like there's a lot more at stake, especially when you really, really care or you're really romantically invested. And I think something I've realized over the last 2 years, honestly, because to your point, like I was like grind, grind, grind. Like I don't need anyone. I think
Yeah.
after my last relationship, I was just like, I don't need anyone. Like I have my business, it's my heart, and like all I need to do is work. And I think I hit this like really hard wall last year with like work where I just felt, to your point, like so underwater. I still feel like underwater, honestly, but like in a good way now. I feel like last year I was just like underwater. Like I was like trying, I felt so helpless. I like was plateauing, and I'm like, I wasn't doing bad, but I was plateauing. Like I like
Yeah.
needed to like elevate in some way. And I just felt so alone. Like I
Yeah.
would come home and like the echo of my like loft would like haunt me. And I
Yeah.
realized like, oh, how lovely it would be to like live my life not needing anyone. And
Yeah.
I think it's like just not it's not reality. And I think it was in that moment last year where I was like, no, like I need to start being vulnerable and I need to put myself out there because I don't want to be alone. Like I do want to come home and be able to let go of work and like have someone to like
Yes.
be like, you're good, like
Yeah.
just as you are. And like
Yeah.
that, I know that I am, but it feels good to have like that support. And I think, I don't know, I just think like sometimes especially as entrepreneurs, like we can get stuck in this like I only need this pillar.
Yeah.
And I talk a lot about how like we need the other pillars. Like you
Yeah.
need like a friendship pillar and a romantic pillar and a for fun pillar and a hobby pillar. Like those pillars are like what make us human and they give us the highest elevated version of ourselves. And I know that's what I want.
Right. There's two things you said. One, the plateau, which I want to go back to because have a new outlook on the plateauing. But the other is I am with you. I got a tattoo on my thigh of a gypsy. And at the time in my
Mm.
life, I was 28. And the significance was love everyone, need no one. And I was very firm in that idea. I just thought I was totally fine. But also, I just want to acknowledge that, like, as women, we have to work so much harder to get where we are when it comes to work that sometimes I think I don't want to say it's like in our best interest, but it's more understandable that women entrepreneurs might say, I don't want distraction, I don't want men in my life or women, whoever you date. But it's because like we have to focus and work 10 times harder sometimes. And so I think like I felt very validated and not really dating most of my 20s. I mean, go on dates, but I never had a significant relationship at all in my 20s. Maybe one person, but he was just so bad and it wasn't real and it was toxic and I knew it would never work out. But I mean, I don't think it was even a thought. Like I was like, yeah, sure, I want someone, but like this is what's important. I don't want to be distracted. So I also think like it's great to feel that way because that's where you're doing all the groundwork to build the foundation so that when days like 38 years old come around, you can, like me, go pick up my kids early, have a date night with my man because I worked my fucking ass off for 10 years.
Totally.
So this business is rock solid so that I can go on vacation for a week and the company can be fine without me. And I appreciate
Totally.
that, but I've been there. I mean, that gypsy tattoo, I meant that with my whole
Yeah.
soul. Love
Yeah.
everyone, need no one. Um,
But
the
I
pla-
also think
Go
it's
ahead.
sorry, no, but I was gonna say, like, I do think what you're saying is so important because, like, a lot of people argue, like, no, like, there should be balance, like, hustle culture isn't good. Like, I fucking have worked so hard the last, like, 7 years, like, no
Yeah,
breaks, no nothing, like,
yep,
grind. I burnt myself to the ground, and, like, some people hear that, like, "Oh, that's not healthy." Like, it's how I got here. I don't know. Like, I didn't
yeah,
take weekends off until this last year. Like,
yeah.
I was working so fucking hard. And I think to your point that you mentioned earlier, it's just being self aware enough to know, like, what are you doing for your business that's actually going to impact its success? And when are you just trying to keep your head down to like hide from real life? And I think
Yes.
like you have to be self aware enough to like figure out when you're doing that and when you're not. But to your point, like, women have to work so fucking hard. And like the reality is, like, entrepreneurship isn't like this glamorous thing, to be honest. I think influencers sometimes make it look that way, but like, and I don't know, there's a lot of influencers too who don't like treat it like a business either. I think it just depends where you're at in your
Yeah.
career. But like for me, like there was no days off. I couldn't even think about like doing something else until recently.
Left the possibility of a career in law to make this work. So I would imagine that there was an extreme heavy weight versus somebody that's like, I don't know, I'm going to try this out and not treat it as a business. You were like, I'm foregoing a career in
Yeah.
law because I believe so much in this. Therefore, I think that you applied the work ethic that you would have to law school to this. And look where you are today.
Totally. I appreciate you saying that. I think like also it's just like I know you could probably agree with this. Like when you are leading with like you what you feel is your life's purpose, like you
Yes.
have no other choice. So
Mhm.
there is a little bit of a weight of like if this doesn't work out, like I don't even want to think of like it has to cuz like I
Yeah.
don't have there's no other option. Of
Yeah.
course, I'm smart and capable, but I
Right.
would be miserable.
Right.
So, like, I don't wanna be miserable. I wanna do what I feel called to do, and I wanna do what I feel passionate about and what I feel is my gift, like, in
Yeah.
this life, and I don't wanna do anything else.
I feel
So
like though, like this will evolve too because I feel like I only wanted to work, for example, with like chefs and restaurateurs, and we did that so hard for so long in Chicago. I moved out here. I found the one restaurant group that I was just like, they're the best, and then they
yeah.
became my client. We worked with them for so long, but as life evolved, my desire to be like out at bars, and I'm just giving the genre of like the work I like to do, and throwing day parties and, doing all of this. In the recently, just in the last few months, I'm like also had a design client, just like loved that. And now all of a sudden
Yeah.
I'm feeling my soul shifting. And so it's interesting because you never know when a shift in the way that you work or the way that this all is for you will start to grow up with you and like evolve into something different or new or better or partnering with somebody. It's like that's the journey that
100%.
I love about this, is that like you really don't know what's around the corner. And I remember that feeling of going, if this doesn't work, I don't know what I'm going to do. It has
Yeah.
to, because I think I'm great. It made me feel so grateful that I never even think about that anymore. That like now at 10 years, like there isn't that thought. But for, of course, probably the first 8, I was like, if it
Yeah.
doesn't work, like what would I do? I wanted to revisit the plateauing, because right now I would say that we are in a little bit of a plateau, and I am like kind of living for it for the first time ever, because that hustle culture says like keep growing, get better, get bigger, more partnerships, more whatever it may be. And right now, I really feel like the universe is showing up and being like, you got everything you ever wanted. Chill out for a little bit. Let's see what visions come. That way, you don't jump to
Yeah.
say yes. And so, this plateau for me is kind of like a pause to kind of look around, to check in with myself, to see what opportunities are coming, to see who makes me feel like on fire when it comes to like creativity and work, and who doesn't make me feel that way. And
Yeah.
it's given me some perspective. So I don't know. I just thought it was interesting when you said the plateau, because I remember I used to think, oh God, if we're plateauing, we're not, relevant,
Yeah.
we're keeping up with the Joneses. And now, older, I see it as just like a still making good money. Everybody's taken care of, everybody's fed. Let's just see what the universe has in store. Take a step
Totally.
back.
It's funny because I feel like I'm now at a place where like when things start to level like that or things start to like slow, I don't panic as much and I
Mhm.
actually like start to actually get excited because I
Yeah,
think like when something plateaus or like something isn't working, I feel that is like a sign to like pivot in some way.
yeah,
Whether that means like relax and take a step back or like go a different direction. And I think for me, like I was always on, I never had like a blow up moment. Like I've always had to like really like just be so consistent and work so hard. And I like gradually grew a community of value. But like 2 years, 2.5 years ago ish, I had like this one moment where like I had this video go viral. It was like the first time it ever happened in like 6 years. It
hmm
hit like 3 million people and like it hit everyone I wanted to, which never happens. It's not, that never happens. And so like it felt like, oh my God, all this consistency has finally paid off. And like I got like, I think it was like 13,000 followers in a month. Like it was the biggest. It was insane. It was all women based in LA, in New York, and San Diego. And the money just flowed in. Like it was crazy. It was like my salary increase was just insane. I was working with like crazy dream brands. Like it was just amazing. And it's still like I'm so thankful to do what I do. I feel so blessed. But at that point, like it was such a high and
yeah,
I didn't realize that like it was just a high. Like it wasn't like it was the first time where like things would jump drastically and I like was under this like naive impression it was just going to like stay up there and keep going. So
yeah,
like but it was a long time. It was like a year of just like amazing business, amazing partnerships, amazing engagement. Like I really just thought I'd like killed and I did kill it. But like I thought it was staying there. And
right.
then last year, like the beginning of last year, it just like went back to normal and like plateaued. And I had like so much anxiety. I was so confused. The money was just like slowly going back to this like good place. It was still good, but it was just like not anything compared to the year before that I had. So I was like really panicked. And like I went through this plateau and it like really tanked my mental health. Like it was the first time since I had done all this work in therapy that I was experiencing anxiety again. I was
Yeah,
like depressed. I like my self-worth was being triggered and like I learned great lessons, but it is the that plateau is the only reason I started the consulting agency. Like I had enough time to slow down to like hear people around me be like, how did you do it? How did you do it? And it made me think like, wow, like I could start this thing. Like I can expand my entrepreneur itch to like a full blown another thing. And it's like an extension of my self brand, but do something completely different, like work with people. But I was so stubborn. It took me like 6 months to accept.
Right,
Like, I was
right,
like, this is not the plan for me. Like,
right.
I'm just supposed to be an influencer, speaker, and podcaster. I'm supposed to be behind the camera. That's it. And I like had this weird insecurity, I want to say, or like anxiety that like my dream was like being destroyed.
Can I ask
And
something?
yeah,
Because I'm not of the influencer era. Like I still feel like, I don't mean to keep like aging myself because I used to hate when like people who are older than me kept talking about their age because I was like, you're fine, who cares? Stop talking about it. And now I'm that
no,
person.
you're good.
I was like, can you tell me about, but I do find it interesting that if an influencer like has a real job, that somehow they failed, like
I
because
know.
what the income from the brand partnerships isn't enough to merit. But to me, and again, maybe I'm like aging myself, but it's like that seems like the smartest thing you can do so that when the months are great and it's flowing, you're throwing that into savings or investments. And then when it's
Yeah.
not, you have something to fall back on. But I feel like for younger people, they're not seeing it that way. Like,
I think
tell
it's
me
an
more
ego
about that.
thing. I think
Oh,
it's
yeah.
an ego thing. And I think it's also like think about it in the sense of like being a singer. Like if you like got your dream of being a singer and then like all of a sudden like after your first hit, like things didn't work out and you had to like go back to like I don't
Working
know,
at
something else,
McDonald's. No,
I
I'm just kidding.
guess. I know, but and it's I feel like so
I
bad
know.
saying that because it's like not at all what I did, but like yeah, like it's this like fake thing. It's like an
Yeah.
ego thing. And like at least for me, like I think it's because of like how strongly I believe in my purpose that it felt very like identity deregulating.
Yeah.
I think for some people like this what you're bringing up is super important because I just feel like there's almost this like how do I want to word it? Like fake reality that like everyone can just like be an influencer and make a shit ton of money. I'm gonna say you can't because I've done it for a while and like just like and I if even if I didn't start the consulting agency, like I still could have lived off of like what I was making just as an influencer. I'm just not wired like that. Like I want to make like
Yeah.
good money. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like really good money. I think women like feel ashamed to say that. Like I don't. Like
No, not me.
I want to make a lot of money. And
Yeah.
so I think it hit this point where I was like, I'm not going to get there if I keep just like waiting for these big surges to happen. But
Right.
it did feel like an ego, like I had to have like an ego death
Right.
because it to me felt so big. Like it felt so like, how could I do this? And it's
Right.
like, I'm so happy I did. Like, I look back, I mean, not even because of like how much it's increased my salary, but
Right.
like it's given me like so much. Like
Well,
it's
it's so
given
much
it's
more like true connection too, that like
yeah.
you're setting yourself up. But one thing I just keep thinking as an entrepreneur is what an incredible third business, fourth business I'm suggesting for you right now,
Ooh.
which is working with influencers on sort of two prong. One, the emotional aspect of that roller coaster and like either like tips and tricks. I don't know if you're already doing that, but I find that like niche very interesting of like when your numbers aren't crushing it, like yeah, I don't know, like some like class or something where you're like helping people through, but then on the other side like helping influencers plan that backup for those low
Yeah.
times and like acknowledging like yeah, this is a great ride and like we are so grateful in the months we do great, but like all of us sometimes want to start planning in the background for either what's next or what's more, and like helping people with that because I could imagine especially at a young age if you really get to become influential in that world, how the hell would you think about a backup? I mean, of course, you're only looking at that as what's
Yeah.
possible. And so if 5 years later that starts to dwindle and the little potion of what you've been doing isn't working anymore and you can't figure out what, I feel like somebody like you could like really sit down and be like, let's go through your content. Let's understand your
Yeah.
passion. Let's, whether it's, selling tea, creating a tea line. I mean, it could be like anything, but I don't know. I just feel like that's something that somebody needs to be doing if they're not already, which is,
Yeah.
creating that.
Well, I think what's happening is like, so when I started, like, I'm telling you, like, TikTok wasn't a thing. So, like, people didn't think they could be an influencer. And I think there's a beauty in like people like really believing they can do this. I think anyone can do this. I think TikTok has provided like a beautiful space to show a lot of people like you don't have to be this like fashion person to be an influencer. Like I think it's opened up the space in a beautiful way. But I think the problem is that like now it's gotten so oversaturated that like there's there's not as much money to go around. Like
Yeah.
there is, like of course, like people ask me, depending on what day you ask me, like someone will be like, do you think the space is oversaturated? Like no, because I think no one can be you. So if you can like
Yeah.
utilize it in a way, no, it's not. But I think the problem is that a lot of people don't treat this like a job. They like don't understand like what it actually takes to like hit like like $100,000 salary in this industry. So like they're very disappointed
Mhm.
by like the results if they're not hustling or they're not pitching or they don't know how to do that or they don't know how to negotiate and all of that stuff. So like I think now it's getting to a spot where there's so many people, there's not as much money to go around, there's not as much partnership. You're competing more with like more people because it's just
Sure.
more people are trying to do it. And that's why I think people like myself were like, what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
why am I not securing as much money as I used to? Or there's other people like, this isn't as easy as I thought it was going to be. So I think it's like figuring out now, like, how do you create like multiple streams of income?
Yes.
Like,
That's what I
that
mean.
makes sense. I mean, for me,
Yes.
like,
Because
the
all of your
podcast
brands are
was
aligned. It's not like
totally
that's like you're like on the side selling candles, nothing against it.
no,
Not
no. No, yeah, I think like the podcast was always like, okay, another multiple stream of income. I'm on every single platform that like exists as well. So like
uh-huh.
that, but like aside from like brand partnerships, like what am I doing? So like for me it was always like I'm gonna start a fashion line, like I already know that. I want to write a book, I already know that. But these are all things that kind of tie to the influencing thing. So
Yeah.
like for me it made sense, there was a demand, like people. So if you're listening and trying to figure out like what is your other thing, like what are people around you like asking for, like
Yeah.
what is missing? I think for me it was so many people coming to me being like, how did you do this, how did you do this? And I was realizing that like in my space there wasn't an influencer run company that was teaching people how to show up online. There was a lot
Yeah.
of PR people and a
Yep.
lot of like marketing professionals, but quite
Right.
frankly like they don't have the experience I do. So
Right.
like to me I was like, this is a no-brainer and I can like
Yeah.
secure clients. I think like that's important. Like think about like how easy it's going to be to like get it going, because for me it
Right.
was like I already had 5 people that have asked. So
Yeah.
like I think it's just trying to find like
You're like
where's your skill.
evolving. Yeah, you're evolving by responding to the need and the demand. And I think that is why at a certain point as an entrepreneur, you stop wondering what's next or if it's going to work out because your entire job is to respond to the
A
public's need.
hundred
And I'm
percent.
not an influencer and I'm doing that with our creative agency, whether
Mhm.
it's like I didn't do a lot of, PR anymore. I was like, I just don't like it. And it's so much work for so little pay. So then we started doing consulting, and all of a sudden I realized this just opened a whole world. So
Totally.
I'm so grateful that we had this
Me
conversation, the
too.
evolution of your brand and who you are and how unapologetic you are, and even just the evolution of being unapologetic
Thank
as a
you.
woman, as a business owner. Tell everybody where they can listen to you and find you. I'm so grateful that we had this time together. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
No, thank you for reaching out. I am honored to be invited. It's always fun and inspiring for me to talk to like another woman entrepreneur in this creative space, just creative space especially as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can follow me at How Han Sees It everywhere. Like I'm everywhere. I don't sleep. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. The blog is howhandseesit.com. That's like usually where I post all the links to shop everything. The podcast is How I See It. It's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And Instagram for that is How I See It Pod. And then if you need social media consulting or social media strategy, unapologetic strategies, and you can just email me at the email on How Han Sees It as well, or DM me and we can set up a meeting that way.
Yeah. I wish you all the best. I'll be
Thank
following
you.
along. If you ever need anything, I'm here. But I think you're doing such
Same.
a beautiful job. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yay.